So I noticed in this game there are no dragons. Can you talk about why?
Maybe there are. You just didn't hit them yet. There could be space.
It's true. I
dragons.
didn't play.
We
a full
didn't
game.
see all the missions.
Yeah.
It's very possible. My name is still Chris Glein. But we're going to talk about a game called Undiscovered, which is very different from Dragon Family. It is a space exploration game where you are a captain of a single ship, and you have crew and cargo that you're managing. You have a ship that you're upgrading, and you're all out to explore space and compete on a set of science fiction trope missions. So the player who wins is who is ever able to kind of get out there first and explore space, but also leverage their crew, their cargo, and their ship to be good at these space missions. And they're very varied. They're all over the place with kind of fun interactions that come from the mechanics of like how can you evoke the feeling of this type of story with these few verbs. So the game rests on a couple of pillars. One is a deck building mechanic, which is kind of a different style deck building mechanic where it's not a 10-card deck and a 5-card hand. It's a 9-card deck with 3-card hands and cards that you actually like. So it's not just about like get rid of the stuff. It's more about tuning. It has a different feel. It's actually a really interesting design space. Then you've also got the shipbuilding thing where you are buying persistent upgrades to your ship, and this is what helps you control the randomness of your deck and kind of focus it. And it's got this mechanic where you slot in little things, and it feels like you're building something and building up to something and having some ownership of that. And then the third major mechanic is space itself, which is a board that is randomized and modular, so that actually the pieces can move around, space can fold and go into space maelstroms and stuff like that. But space is providing this area where it's like a deck builder where you have to move around in order to acquire cards and think about positioning in addition to these other things. So the result is a game that it is not lightweight, nor is it really heavyweight. Like this is no Twilight Imperium or something like that. This is, but it's not like your first deck builder. It's got a number of things layering together that are individually simple, but together it's a lot for non-gamers. But it really scratches a niche for people who like that deck building, who are enthusiastic about space and like a little bit of a sense of adventure in space. This place not where it's like grim, dark, serious, and not where it's full on wacky, but like it's colorful and bright and interesting. So that's Undiscovered.
So one of the things I noticed, and you kind of mentioned it here, is you said you start with a deck of cards you like, and that's because I would say it's because the variance in the cards that you have versus the cards that you purchase is not as high as it would be in a game like Dominion and things like that. Do you think, but that also means that when you look at a whole bunch of cards that you can buy or add to your deck, I found I wasn't that excited about a lot of them. I was like, oh, well, these aren't that dissimilar to what I already have. Has that been an experience that you've had, or is it, do you think that the game doesn't really encourage you to build your deck up and
It's something that kind of has to be learned in that it's a different space. When you're looking at a 3-card hand versus a 5-card hand, the amount of impact of a very powerful card in a 3-card hand, because you could draw many together, is much higher. So it's something I had to learn in designing this game, is that I would make very powerful cards and they would be hugely destabilizing. And so you learn this space which is just interesting enough that you can tune and shape your direction without throwing off the balance and making it so that your turns are crazy out of balance from other people's turns. The valuation of cards is something that it does have to be learned to think about in a different way. Right.
But you don't think it has any, makes it harder to find the card or add cards to your deck because you're just not as excited about getting a new card, or?
I've worked my best to make sure there actually are no bad cards, which I say some people laugh at me like these cards are garbage. I'm like, oh, you put the right cards together and they'll create interesting situations. Layering those combinations on, they may not be obvious, but they are there. But it is something where you can look at those cards and be like, I don't want to interact with that. I don't want to purchase these. There are other avenues for you to explore the game and then find your way back to that. So I can't remember if I relayed this story, but it's my favorite story. So I had 2 people playing the game, and they didn't tell me much in advance. And after the game, one of them said, I hate deck builders. I'm like, why didn't you tell me that to begin with? When you sat down to play this game, I told you it was deck building. But what they did is they interacted completely with the shipbuilding and the mission completion thing. And they actually did very well by focusing on that strategy and trying to figure out how can I leverage this deck here in order to do those things. And it was a rewarding path, whereas building your deck is another rewarding path. So it's been nice to have very different ways to approach the game that fit different people's wants.
So you have this shipbuilding, shipbuilding element to the game, where you're connecting cards that have these connectors. And when we played, it was a shorter game. So when we were building, there were no points in time where we couldn't connect any of our kind of parts of the ship. So I'm curious to know what you think that kind of mechanic adds. It's kind of a novel feature, but how does it change the game, whether you could just gain the card straight up or whether you have to connect it?
I mean, a lot of it is selling the theme and grabbing people and like, here's a thing that you're building. It's a physical expression of progress that's a little more than a stack of cards. But as far as reaching the cap, you will at some point kind of fill out your ship and reach a cap on how many different abilities you have. And part of that is limiting the complexity. Part of it is limiting table space. But there are cards that allow you to expand that and get more connectors, which provide kind of that reward for people who really want to go deep into that shipbuilding thing. Like, here's a thing that you can do. But they could mechanically be just cards that sat out there, but they're actually very subtly balanced so that the way the game's set up is you have a connector on the left and a connector on the right, and you can't swap those. You only have one of each, and you have 2 on top and 2 on bottom. And the cards are balanced such that if you take a thing over here, you're actually making a choice that you can't get this other thing. It's not an obvious choice, but from a game balance perspective, you are then going to be cut off from these other cards unless you want to waste some time and resources to swap that out. In particular, like the movement enhancing abilities are on this side. That does a couple of things. It makes these choices and make you feel like, oh, next game I'm going to try that different avenue. But it also leaves resources up to other players so that if you grab this, like movement accelerating card, you're not going to take the ones from the other players that pop up. So there are things that are benefiting from that type of layout that are not just thematic.
Sorry, I don't remember. How many turns is a typical game?
How many turns is a typical game? That's something I should totally have the answer to. But I totally don't. It varies. Turns can be very fast, especially with experienced players. That's intentional with a 3-card hander that you can be like, I'm moving, I'm getting 2 money. And they can go around that. And then you have other turns that are, it's your big turn. You're like, okay, I've docked some cards. I'm doing something special this turn. I'm swooping in here and putting a thing on this mission and that mission. So the individual turn length can be variable. I don't have a feel for turn count. Balancing the overall length has been a very interesting exercise. I've really had to think about what's your learner game look like, because it is not the same as the game that your second game. And figuring out how to, and I think I threw you guys in the deep end and like, I'm throwing all the cards, I'm going to show you everything. Maybe that was a mistake, I don't know. But there are a lot of things that you should emerge after your first game thinking about, I want to do this differently, I want to do this better. And for a first player, they're learning a lot of things. And so the turn length can be really long, and so you have to have this learner game, you reduce those options and compress that a little bit. But the end goal is a game that you can play in an hour, and you can actually, you can do a lot in an hour. You can play a deeper game to a high point total with experienced players. I don't know how many turns.
Yeah. So I guess my comment on that would be, with deck builders, it's extremely important. Like, a lot of the joy in deck builders is building an engine,
Yeah.
and if you don't have enough turns or enough opportunities to build that engine, then you don't get to feel like you got somewhere with it.
Yeah. So I see. So with starting with a 9-card deck and a 3-card hand, instead of seeing your starting setup in 2 chunks, it's going to take 3 chunks. So it's going to take you more iterations to get through. And so the game needs to have these kind of micro turns that move it through, so that you get that payoff, and it needs enough turns to go out. I do see that you get that payoff. You're like, this clone I bought has paid me off time and time again. But it needs to be a game longer than the one we were able to.
Yeah, but have you considered any automatic filtering options for your deck?
Automatic filtering.
Just like on your turn, you can remove a card from your discard pile or your hand or.
Oh yeah, trash
whatever.
compactor. It's a card.
Yeah, I know, but automatic. Like I was seeking those
built in.
things out
Yeah,
because I was
like
like,
as a rule. Like-
it will take me 4 turns to get through this deck to the beginning of this deck again. I need to filter it down, so I took every opportunity I could to find filtering things.
Yes.
But an automatic one might be.
I did
Very
have,
valuable.
actually had one for a long time, which was a draw 3 discard 2? It was a way to basically mulligan your hand, more or less, to get something better to get you through your deck faster. The trade-off of that was that it countered the goal of faster turns, and that it was interjecting more of this choice there. And I made a very conscious decision in this game. There's no mid-turn draws, so that you have the maximum ability to think about your turn as you're going along. Things should be as static as possible while still being interactive. But you're not going to be like, okay, my turn starts, first thing I'm going to do is draw 3 cards and figure out what to do. And I did try versions of that you could do in between turns, and found that people would wait until it was their turn so they could play it the most optimally. And so at the end, I've just tried to focus on get those turns as fast as possible.
Are you talking about discarding cards or removing cards?
Removing cards.
She's talking
So
about
you
removing
play your
cards.
turn.
Yes.
You may remove a card from your discard pile from the game.
So full on trash
Just
effect.
as
Yes.
as a default, this is what you can do on your turn. You don't need to go buy a card to do it.
Yes. In a lot of deck builders, getting rid of your starting hand is pretty essential. And this is playing a little bit differently in that the things that you have in your starting deck are actually essential to doing your business. It's you don't want to get rid of all of them. It's actually not it's not a good decision to get rid of them. So there are cards that do that, but it's at a very deliberate pace so that you don't hamstring yourself. You need to fill those gaps. Like if you're going to say like, I don't need so much fuel, I'm going to throw that away, you're going to be in a bad place if you do that too much. Unless you fill it in with, oh, I got this engineer, I got this engine upgrade, I'm filling it out.
Yeah, but I'm just saying is, as a deck builder, as it stands currently, you're disincentivized from buying cards because it will increase the size of your deck, and the game may only last 6 turns, and there's a good chance you're not going to see that card again until turn 7 that you just bought.
Right. Also, I mean, I played a lot of deck builders. I'm gonna have to disagree with you on you don't want to get rid of your starting cards. There's a card, Ace Pilot, that gives you 2 moves, and your starting ones give you 1 move. I certainly want to get rid of the 1 move ones, so I have a higher probability of getting the 2 move one in any situation I can. I mean, generally when I play deck builders, I look for card filtering, card draw, and step up economic cards that instead of giving me 1 resource, give me 2 resource. And those are basically the 3 ones that will typically get you closer to the victory path. I noticed, like, one thing I kind of felt was I didn't have the big turns because of your restriction on no midterm draws. Like, I only have 3 cards. A lot of my ship actions take 3 cards. A lot of the cards in the center are discard 3 cards, and any sort of mission I want to do is going to use basically my whole hand. It's like I had all these choices, but I couldn't get the big turn. It was like I could just pick this option or this option or this option and like just do one thing, which sort of felt unsatisfying in the mid game.
That's fair. A number of things to respond to there. So I don't mean that you don't want to get rid of any of your starting cards. I mean you don't want to get rid of all of them. You want to be more particular about which ones you get rid of. So once you acquire that Ace Pilot, you're looking at that field being like, I could lose some fuel, that'd be okay. But if then you just get rid of all your cargo that you can sell for money, you're going to run into other problems as well. It's not just like if I'm playing Ascension, I'm like, get rid of all of these as fast as possible. There's more, there's a slower pace and more of a choice into what you're getting rid of. But it is good to get rid of them, just not without decision. Like, I'm not going to think about getting rid of an apprentice in Ascension. I'm going to trash that as soon
Yeah,
as
but I think
possible.
there's a degree that you can trust your players to not hamstring themselves, or if they do, that's on them. But I did find in even just a short game, there were frequently times where the hand of 3 cards that I drew, I didn't have the option to do the thing I wanted that turn. Like go Explorer or something like that. Just didn't have the right hand. Oh, well, I guess this turn is kind of wasted. I'll see if I can buy something new. But
No, the goal is not to have wasted turns, but have incremental progress, which was a tricky balance to get. And it's getting people to feel good about that. Like, is it okay if I move and get a credit if that's all I do? Is that okay? Part of that is you don't want too many of those big turns so you feel like you have a wasted turn. The mechanic that does lead to those big turns is that you've got this docking mechanic where you get to save cards for later, you get more of those. That's one way you can kind of get this even odd turn, where you have your small turns where you're doing a setup and then a big delivery. It's a powerful way to go about it. There are also cards that allow you to draw additional cards at the end of your turn, so it's not a mid-turn draw. There's draw. I'm not saying there's no draw in the game. It's all end of turn draw, so you have time to plan.
So I want to move to a different area. So you have a mechanic there where when you recycle your deck, you lose half of your credits.
Yeah.
What do you think that adds to the game?
Yeah, it's interesting. So part of that is to keep the economy a little more controlled so that you can't just accrue a whole bunch of money and dump it at the end of the turn. It's trying to encourage you to interact with parts of the game by spending that money. It's also weird that it's this thing that I've had people have a positive reaction to, like they feel like they're running their engine well if they get to game that and not lose any money. On the flip side, it can just be a punishing thing for new players. So on my like learner things, it's something where like you can take that off, and that's not necessary. It is a place of mastery that people seem to enjoy, and it helps in that balance the economy so you can't get a whole bunch.
Sorry, but you've talked a bunch about how you want people to be able to build up and have big turns, but that's sort of like, you can do that, but it like short circuits, like halfway through, you're like building up and putting things in your thing, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna have to recycle now, so now I have to recalculate that because I'm gonna lose half of my credits.
I don't know how many big turns and how many sequence do you want. I think it's great to have a big turn where everyone's like, wow, you did this cool stuff, you really leveraged all the decisions you've made, that's awesome. But if you're doing that every turn, and other people are still doing small turns, they don't have an opportunity to catch up or interact with you. So it needs to be gated a little bit, and that you can't just repeatedly do that. You have to like build up some resources and expend them.
So the game has a lot of different kind of mechanics going on at the same time. How did the development of the game kind of come about? Were you adding each thing one at a time, or from the very beginning you wanted all these things to interact in a particular way? And what kind of challenges you run into when you were trying to balance how one mechanic interacted with another?
Yeah, so the origin of it was kind of a reaction to just playing a lot of deck builders. There's a lot of deck builders out there. I mean, pick space and deck builders, and there's a whole bunch of those already out there. It's a very crowded space. But at the same time, I'm dissatisfied with a number of things that's going on there. Like I get frustrated by games where I'm sitting there watching someone mid-turn draw, and there's a lot of space games that are like these big epics, but like I wanted something a little cozier. So the origin there was in the deck building, and like, you know, where's the design space for deck building that people aren't exploring? Why is it always 10 cards and 5 cards? And I've learned some of the reasons why it leans that way. But I think there's interesting space in persistent currency, different hand size, different deck sizes. And so I wanted to explore that. And I put something together that had that, and the shipbuilding came in at the same place because once I had a theme pairing, I wanted your persistent abilities, your way to control the randomness, to make those small hands the hands that you wanted as much as possible. So those came in at the beginning. I can't remember how quickly missions came in. It was very quick. But I wanted you to be doing something that was not just like, I am buying victory points. Like I'm either putting victory points like into my deck, or I'm getting little tokens, and it's like, no. What are we doing with our deck builders? It's fun to build a deck, but like, you want to leverage it to accomplish something. And somewhere out of that, because I was going to have space, these missions came along. I'm like, well, what if it's about testing whether you can, leverage your consistency or go after certain things and compete with other players? Like, how do you interact at deck building? Is it just removing things from a market that other people want, or is it you're actually using this deck for something? So the missions came out of that as kind of the desired player interaction, and that's the origin of the game.
No, going to the missions, you have what I call kind of a cooperative winner-take-all mechanic on the missions, where I put tokens on and somebody else puts tokens on, but at the end, the player who has the most tokens when it hits the threshold takes everything. Did you consider any sort of kind of split mechanics on that? Because historically, those types of things aren't particularly well received.
So there's
notable exceptions.
So it's not entirely winner takes all. Anyone who is a contributing player or running up does get a benefit, and tweaking those to make them feel good is an ongoing process. There's a lot of missions, and figuring out what is appropriate for each one is part of it. But as far as splitting victory points, which I think is what you're getting to, the main motivation for that is that it's nice to just take the card and have that be the victory point, not just from a component reduction thing, but you can look back at the end again and be like, what did I do? Oh, I did this exploration and I did this mission, and wasn't that cool? And if you do a split thing, you need another component. You either need a point track or tokens or some victory point cards that you give out. And so mostly it's been about avoiding that business and trying to reward in other ways. So it's like, okay, maybe you don't get the points, but can I give you a reward that accelerates you into getting your next point? Tweaking those values. So it's like, yeah, with some cash, with some cards, go for it.
I think we saw that. I mean, like in my experience with the missions, it was a cost reward calculation of like, how much does it cost me to throw one token on this mission, and what reward do I get even if I don't win the mission? And thematically, I think it makes sense to me. Like if you are the one who deals with whatever that particular mission is, then maybe I paid someone else to help me, but they didn't get the glory.
Do you feel like the missions take too long to accomplish, or just right? Because the ones I saw take like 4 or 5 turns. to finish.
They are variable, so they take different number of turns. Like the longest one is the Solar Kraken, which can be like a hot competition that lasts for a while. The game is actually good if they have enough time to sit there and give people time to respond. If a mission pops and it's just like, oh, I happen to have the right thing, and you get the reward, it ends up not feeling great. So there's a very careful balance of like how long is right, and right is like enough for everyone get a shot to really go for that. So they do need to sit there for a little while. And then there's the thought of like, thematically, this particular mission I'm trying to model with these mechanics, how should that play out? And so there's a variance within that of like, maybe it's just a quick thing that is a reward for having the right thing, but it's a small reward. And maybe there's a big thing that I really want everyone to come in and deal with because it's affecting their gameplay. Like there's a gravity well that keeps sucking in ships every turn, and that ends up being like, who's going to take care of that gravity well? Someone's got to take care of that gravity well. It's affecting the game, so you want it to be there long enough to affect the game and have people respond.
I am curious with the very slow progression of the deck based on how it's been set up, and also the size of the space that we're exploring. Have you played longer games? Do those feel satisfying of like, let's just play for 2 hours rather than my 1 hour game time? And like, did that explode the excitement, or did it just feel like more of a slog toward the end and you're like, no, it needs to be cut off earlier?
I've definitely played 2 hour games. I mean, certainly with balancing the game, sometimes you get things or you get slow plays. But when, I think I know how to respond to this. Like when I play with my wife, who's played this game a lot with me, we intentionally play to a longer point total because it gives more time to really get through that variability and prove out like who is the best. So we intentionally play for a longer game because it gets more of those iterations, more of those missions to the table. But we're able to, with experienced players, you can play quick enough that it's totally fine. Like you feel you're always doing something, you're not waiting and moving around with a quick clip. But getting those extra repetitions is actually satisfying. Mostly I try to bring things down because most people don't want to sign up for a 2 hour game. Like 1 hour is more where people want to be. I think the game holds up to those longer playthroughs quite well.
Okay.
Are we done? Questions, judges? Okay. Thank you very much, contestants. Thank you.